All right, so today Chrissy and I are talking about plant-based diet and how it can be a key habit for you to sort of feel that thrive in your life. So Chrissy, what's your experience and understanding with that idea of eating plant-based?
My experience with it is that I noticed it was a natural progression for me. So I am vegetarian. It was a natural progression for me though. And I didn't eat a lot of meat as a kid. And so it wasn't difficult for me to make the transition. And I wanted to do it kind of as I went along with my practices and how I was feeling. But I did it the wrong way the first time and didn't have the proper balance and nutrients that I needed. And then I was looking to a lot of junk food and filler food to kind of keep me going. And I had to relearn how to have a really balanced diet. And so that was really key. And so I think the biggest thing is to go back to whole foods, whether you're vegetarian or not, going back to whole foods and cutting out processed stuff and stuff that's easy, right? But not necessarily good for us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a vegetarian. I eat pretty much everything. But this experiment for me has been so interesting and just understanding the things that don't promote the feeling of vitality in me. And my current experiment is all around lunch.
Right.
Lunch and the association between that and my afternoon energy level. Because I wake up with a really good, consistent energy through the morning, and it's good. And then that lunchtime happens, and I can often have an afternoon where I just feel like, oh, I just want to sit on the couch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so have you put a connection to that? Like
Yeah.
what you're eating and how it's making you feel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the whole idea of eating lighter at dinner makes your lunch even more important.
Totally.
Right? And for me right now, my lunch, if it's last night's leftovers, that's my best bet. Yeah. And I know Ayurveda sort of doesn't promote the idea of leftovers very much, but for me, it's one of those things where last night's dinner was usually really good. And so that meal, if I can add a few more, sometimes it's adding a few more vegetables to it or a piece of fruit.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think the more you develop this sensitivity, you do see how that midday meal actually does become more important. And that's the tone for then dinner and then how you progress right through the night and into the next day. So,
and I feel like I've got like the morning and the nighttime kind of organized, but this middle day kind of period. And the funny thing that's interesting is that it's the one time I'm only responsible for me. And when I'm responsible for other people, I'm way more responsible to them than I am to myself, which is also a really interesting reflection on it all.
Totally.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
You were saying you grew up eating whatever you wanted.
Well, I did. I didn't eat a lot of meat though. I was kind of, I was actually a little bit of a picky eater, to be honest, now that I think back of it, because I didn't like combining foods. I liked everything separate. So I was like the hardest kid to pack a lunch for. I would eat yogurt or I would eat fruit and veggies for lunch. I never liked sandwiches because they would get smushy. And I didn't like eating meat, processed meat and stuff like that when I was a kid. So I grew up kind of, eating slightly different from the rest of my family for sure. And I definitely never felt the need to eat a lot of meat. And I also had some health concerns that made me kind of play around with my diet as well. And I found that how much better I felt when I didn't have certain things in my diet. So, and my family had this idea that eat whatever you want, no matter how it makes you feel, and just take some Pepto-Bismol or take something to make yourself feel better. And so what they modeled to me was just this idea of almost like eat whatever you want and fulfill your senses, but ignore how your body's feeling and just
Yeah.
enjoy that, and then take something later to kind of remedy it. And I started to look at that and be like, oh, but that makes me feel so terrible. If I don't eat that, or I don't eat at that time, I feel so much better. Why wouldn't I choose that as opposed to putting more stuff in my body?
The way you phrased that was so interesting to me. Eat whatever you want to fulfill your senses and ignore your body. And I feel like that's almost our whole experiment, isn't it, with Ayurveda, is saying, hang on, our body has this like massive piece of wisdom that it's like trying to deliver to you on this silver platter. It's like serving it up to you in all these different sensations that you get. Mm-hmm. And we live in a culture that goes, meh, like, it's okay. Pepto-Bismol, like, let's just Band-Aid this. Tums.
Exactly. Yes. And Tums. Totally.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like this experiment that we're doing really has to do with, okay, we get it. We get that your senses like Oreos and your senses like whatever. But if you can listen to your body would probably tell you something to do something differently. Totally. And so while we experiment with this week of plant-based diet, it's just the idea of introducing a listening to your own body as to what it feels served by. What does your body feel served by? And if we could start
developing listening. And feeling, and even going back to these lighter dinners and earlier dinners, I'm starting to really feel those signals of like, oh, I'm actually hungry because I'm hungry. Yeah. I'm not going to eat because I feel like eating. And so to shift out of that is super powerful, because I've been trying to balance my insulin levels. That's one of the things I'm trying to work on. And my blood sugar was spiking, right? And I was propelling me to eat. And now I'm seeing how there's a difference between needing to eat because of that and eating because you're actually hungry. And going back to listening to those signals and changing what's happening in my body and what's happening with my hormones. It's fascinating.
So how are you a diabetic?
Well, so one of the things that I was diagnosed with this past year was polycystic ovarian syndrome, and it affects your insulin levels. And so I've started to become insulin resistant. Okay. So the doctor said I need to increase my insulin sensitivity. So go back to really feeling when my insulin is off balance, and I need to do that through diet and through food. And so it's so interesting, because this is one of the habits that or one of the things that is developed by me letting go of some of these habits. And I'm sure it was there for a long time, but the habits were keeping it in check. And so over the last 2 years, I said, with things changing and schedules changing, I started to eat later and I started to eat more. And I noticed how that was affecting my blood sugar levels and my insulin. And so just in the last, seriously, 3 weeks of going back to this really diligently, of eating a lighter dinner and an earlier dinner, my blood sugar's totally stabilized.
Really?
Totally.
Isn't that fascinating? I mean, it's something that most of us don't pay attention to unless you are tracking it for diabetes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm amazed and I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
And I'm going, like, I wasn't able to go more than 2 or 3 hours without eating something. And of course, then I'm trying to figure out what am I going to eat in those 2 hours and every 2 hours to balance things out. Now, again, that evening, overnight fasting, I'm going 16, 17 hours. And I mean, I get up early, so I'm getting up at 5. I'm not eating breakfast. I do call it breakfast lunch now. Yeah. It's not till 11. Yeah. And so I'm getting all those waking hours in, but I'm not eating, but I'm not actually hungry. And my blood sugar isn't all crazy like it was before.
Right. So what an interesting thing. I mean, we're taught, and it works when you're in a diabetic insulin event, to put that sugar into your body, right? And it does help stabilize things momentarily and temporarily. And it's almost like that's how we're taught to manage insulin, is to feed ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has been a whole experiment for me. I'm loving it. I can't even believe how much better I feel. And I don't have the highs and lows that are going with the blood sugar going up and down, right? It's fascinating. And I love this because that's the whole thing. It's like an experiment. And I had told my doctor like 6 months ago, I'm like, give me some time here. Let me, figure this out, because there's got to be a way, right, to bring this all back into balance. And she's like, I totally believe you. And I know you can do it because I've seen you do it with other things. But I'm like, we should be able to do this on our own. And I don't want to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Where I am diabetic or something like that. And especially when it has to do with all my hormones and stuff. I'm like, no, there's got to be a way. So it's been fascinating for sure.
That is fascinating. It always, and so great that you have the support from your medical doctor. Yeah. Because that's not always usual either. Yeah.
It's not. No, she's great for sure.
Yeah. So what do you think your takeaway is then? What's your biggest piece of advice when you're talking about this idea of eat a plant-based diet?
I think it's the idea of trying to go back to whole foods as much as possible and unprocessed foods. So, and eating more fruits and vegetables. So trying to have more of that on your plate, or as a snack. And cutting down on anything refined, bread and stuff like that. Trying to look at if you're going to eat those with the least amount of ingredients in them, right? So that you're not putting a whole bunch of other stuff in your system. And as for meat, thinking about the idea of like healthy, happy animals, and if you're putting that in your body, then those animals are healthy. That is creating a healthy, happy energy in you, right? So farm rice, grass-fed, free range, things like that. Then
wild
meat. Then you're creating. It's a better kind of exchange, right? And it's going to support how you feel inside, because if you think of that idea of prana in your body, and we get prana from food. And so the less processed it is, the more whole it is, the less untouched it is, the happier it is, the more that prana is going into our body and is going to fulfill and sustain us.
Which is why when I go back to the whole leftovers thing, which is why they say that, Ayurveda is not a big fan of, on Sunday, cook a whole bunch of food and then put it in the freezer and every day take out new food, because that sort of system just breaks prana down. It breaks prana down. So while it can be, I think she tells a story about that in the book, actually. So that story of the guy who just eats leftovers is in the book. But it does help you sort of see how to do it. And eating more plants isn't about having a salad, although it could be about having a salad. It can be eating those fruits and vegetables however your body needs them. You and I had a conversation once about how you needed to actually cook your food.
Yes, I do. I still do.
Talk about that just briefly, about like fruits and vegetables don't have to be raw in order for them to be introduced into your diet.
Yeah, and I learned this from the Ayurvedic Center, because I had a really bad digestive system issue, and I had IBS, and the doctors couldn't do anything. And I was vegetarian. I'm a Vata, and I was eating all raw, cold food. And they simply said to me that your system can't digest any of this. Your digestive fire's gone out. And so you just need to warm your food up. And also start with warm food in the morning. So don't have cold cereal, right? Don't have a smoothie. Put something warm into your body first thing in the morning that wakes up your Agni, your digestive fire. And then even just lightly steaming vegetables, or putting like fruit in my oatmeal so that it's warm, right? And my body was able to break it down and start to actually absorb the nutrients, because I was told to go back to eating meat because I couldn't digest anything. And I was losing so much and I wasn't absorbing anything. And again, just these simple changes are, and I mean, I stand by that. It's been 9 years since I was at the Ayurveda Center in India, and I rarely eat cold food.
Yeah.
It's just that important. me.
I think that I think everything's always coming back to us, especially in this conversation about just experiment. Experiment with what you're eating because your senses are saying, oh, that would be so good. And what you're eating because your body says, oh, that would be so good, right? And always just mess with the system, because you over the last 10 years have been divining your own little food system, and it's working.
Totally.
It's controlling dis-ease in your body.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we're all different. So what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you. And that's the beauty of Ayurveda, is that it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
We're taking not only like, it's taking all aspects of you, your personality, you know, everything that's come before, how your body is now, your environment, everything. And based on that, what is best for you? What do you need now? And that might change. And so being open to playing with that and experimenting to see what makes you feel your best.
Yeah.
And how, you know, what you do to achieve that is going to be different from what I do or what somebody else does.
Yeah, that's absolutely the best takeaway for Ayurveda. It absolutely is that everything is different. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for this chat.
Good.
We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.